This guy was obviously frankly, a homicidal maniac and was intent on killing people.
A statewide manhunt comes to a devastating close when an Idaho man is arrested and charged for the murder of his wife and unborn child. All this after he allegedly kidnapped his 10-month-old baby and was found wandering around naked before the boy's body was recovered. Already, it's a case with many twists and shocking details, so we're turning to former FBI agent Colin Schmidt to make sense of the details as we know them.
It's just simply an extremely tragic situation, and once again, it's another testament of our kind of frayed mental health system, and somebody kind of slipped through the cracks and harmed innocent others.
The story begins on November 29th when 48-year-old Jeremy Best was found naked walking through the aisles of a Swan Valley, Idaho general store. The Bonneville County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene, where Best was reportedly taken to the Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Center for a mental health evaluation. But the next day, on November 30th, authorities say he murdered his wife, 38-year-old Callie Randall Best, who was 28 weeks pregnant with their second child. Idaho authorities arrived at a Victor, Idaho home to find Callie dead after a dispatcher heard a disturbance during a 911 call. According to a criminal complaint, Best killed, quote, Mrs. Callie Randall Best, a human being, by shooting her in the back and or breast and or right side and causing her death. Investigators also found the couple's son, 10-month-old Zeke, was missing. That's when they put out an Amber Alert for the baby and a warning that Jeremy Best was armed and dangerous. Days later, on December 2nd, Best was found about an hour west in Idaho Falls. Someone had called 911, reporting a man in a sleeping bag on the side of the road. When officials got there, Best was naked and delirious. Also on the scene, investigators found the body of 10-month-old Zeke in the woods. So far, Best has not been charged in this death, and details about it have not yet been released. I'm questioning, what about a murder charge for the 10-month-old son that was found dead? Could there be a charge for that eventually?
Certainly, I mean, it depends on what where the facts lead. They generally will charge the most obvious crime first, just to get a hold on him and get him locked up, and make sure he stays behind bars so he doesn't harm anybody else. And then they're going to do a follow-on investigation and see if they can gather evidence to see if he killed this other child.
You said a follow-up investigation. What would that look like?
Well, they're going to do the initial investigations. Basically, it sounds like they went in and they got complaints, and it was basically obvious what happened. He was arrested. They followed up with a search warrant, gathered the obvious evidence of the crime. First of all, made sure they're who the victims were, where they were at, locked the crime scene down, and then went ahead and gathered everything else up. And then the next stage of that is basically to sift through all the evidence they have to see if there's any other victims, anything else going on, and see if anybody may have helped him do this. And with that other child being out there, it appears that they didn't quite have enough to charge him for that at that time when they did the initial search warrant or when they did the initial filing of the charges. But I'm confident they'll go ahead and charge him with that case as well.
Authorities say an autopsy is underway for 10-month-old baby Zeke. When it comes to his death, Schmidt says investigators will search for specific evidence to procure a murder charge against Best.
It may come down to DNA, may come down to circumstantial evidence, basically where the child was, how did it occur, was the death of the child consistent with what happened to his wife? Were there any other any communications he had maybe on his computer and his browser history, anything on his phone? I mean, it's basically it'll be circumstantial, but then again, like I said, if they find evidence of direct evidence like DNA or fingerprint evidence around that child, they'll certainly charge him with that murder as well.
Now, if we're talking about additional charges besides just murder, the first one that comes to mind for me is kidnapping, because Zeke, this 10-month-old baby, after he was missing, there was an Amber Alert that was issued, which to me seems like kidnapping. So could a kidnapping charge be on the way?
It could, but they're going to charge the most obvious thing first, which would be the murder, and kidnapping may just be the proverbial add-on. Ultimately, it's the murder that's important. That's the murder that's going to get him the most time. The kidnapping could be added on. I kind of doubt they will, because frankly, this crime was so heinous and so over the top, they have enough evidence, more than enough evidence to convict him of the murders right on the spot.
Hey, everybody, this is a Morgan and Morgan legal alert. Evidence shows that Google has allegedly violated the privacy of millions of Americans via incognito mode. Your personal information and data may have been unfairly collected and then used for profit. As America's largest injury law firm, Morgan and Morgan has recovered over $20 billion in compensation for clients, and they may be able to help you fight for justice. If you've used incognito mode in Google's Chrome internet browser, you can find out if you have a claim in only a few clicks by visiting www.forthepeople.com/LCGoogle. It only takes a few minutes to sign up and find out if you have a claim.
But on the legal side of things, the jurisdictions where the events took place could complicate things. If we're being really specific about the charges, I feel like things could get tricky here because Callie Best and her unborn child, they were murdered in Teton County, Idaho, but Zeke was found dead in Bonneville County. So if that charge is brought on, is it possible that Jeremy Best, the father and the husband in this case, could face additional charges in two separate counties, meaning two separate cases?
Now, I recall it's the same state, so obviously they could get charged in separate counties. But what happens a lot of times is they'll bundle the charges into one county, so they don't have to separate. Depends on the DAs have to work together and agree to do something like that. And then in terms of kidnapping, if there's a state kidnapping charge, yes, but it doesn't appear that he went over state lines. Therefore, a federal kidnapping charge would not attach.
Before any of the murders even happened, Best's potential mental health break is what Schmidt calls a red flag that had been overlooked.
Absolutely obvious. Here in California, they have something called 5150, which is a number in the code where they can involuntarily incarcerate somebody for a mental health hold. It's a civil process, and then through that process, they determine if he's going to either harm himself or others. It doesn't appear that they did that in this case, and frankly, if they did, they would have found that he had ideations of either harming himself or someone else through the process of talking to him with a trained psychiatrist.
Now, jumping off the details that we were just discussing, he was found naked in a general store before the murders, and then he was found naked after the murders as well, a couple of days later. That's not something I often hear working at Law&Crime Network, that a defendant has been running around naked on multiple occasions. What could have led to that?
Well, it's clear that he had a uh, you know, completely lost any grasp of reality. And frankly, him being naked, and I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but it's obvious that the stress of the crime probably forced him into another psychotic state where he ended up taking off all of his clothes and basically running around naked. So it just appears that this person was so in deep need of psychological assistance and help and medication that he was basically a ticking time bomb. And then ultimately he blew up, and innocent people were harmed.
With that potential mental health break usually comes the potential defense of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. But Idaho is one of the several states that doesn't allow for a criminal insanity defense. According to Idaho state statute, quote, mental condition shall not be a defense to any charge of criminal conduct. Even if that was an option, Schmidt says it's hard to prove.
A lot of people think, well, he'll be found guilty by reason of insanity. That's very, very hard to do. And then, even if it does happen, they would end up spending the rest of their lives under intense psychiatric supervision. And it's very rare that people get that. And then, like I said, if they do in the unlikely event they do get that, they end up spending the rest of their lives locked up frankly, in an insane asylum.
And while Idaho may not have a traditional insanity plea, it does still have the death penalty. And I know we're pretty early on here, but Idaho does have the death penalty. And in a case like this, we've got the death of a mother, her unborn child, and a 10-month-old baby. Is that something you believe prosecutors could seek in this case?
Absolutely. And the fact that children are involved, and I apologize, it is, mentioned Colorado, it happened in Idaho. The fact of the matter is, it's highly likely they will charge that unless his defense comes out with a very quickly plea out to a guilty plea to the murders to take that off the table. But if they do charge him with a death penalty offense, he will try to use the defense of an impaired mental state. And then, of course, there'll be a jury trial, and then it'll be up to the 12 people to decide whether he was impaired when he did these murders.
And because of the serious nature of the crime and the involvement of children, Schmidt says the investigation will be expedited.
The fact that there's children involved or a child involved, I'm sure both jurisdictions and both counties are going to put a lot of resources to this, as well as their best trained homicide detectives. And so, to answer your question, it's likely going to go rather quickly, and then the DNA evidence is going to be given a priority at the local crime lab in Idaho because of the fact that there was a child and it's a murder case that will be charged, and it's most likely that they will charge a death penalty in this case.
A major part of the investigation is determining motive.
It sounds to me the motive is going to end up being his psychological state. So there was probably some stress in his life. The mother did something to anger him, and then of course he was going to take that all out, obviously, on everybody else. But ultimately, the motive will likely be that he simply had just detached from reality, and then he decided to harm these people, these innocent people, for his own personal indulgence. And the fact of the matter, he needs to be in prison and needs to be out of society before he harms somebody else.
The investigation will also take a closer look at Jeremy Best's history.
It comes down to cell phone forensics. In cases like this, they're going to get his phone, they're going to watch him, they're going to see where he went, and that's going to be the circumstantial evidence that links both of the crime scenes, as well as the fact they want to make absolute certain that there's nobody else involved, and just as importantly, there's no other victims out there as well. It was a crime that was focused on family members or people that he had familial relationships with. But in the same breath, they want to look at those cell phone forensics and see his travel or geolocation data to see if he's gone to any other places where they've had some reported missings. So it doesn't look like he's somebody who's like a serial killer who's going after prostitutes or children, so to speak. But they still should rule that out just in case, because this guy was obviously frankly a homicidal maniac and was intent on killing people.
In the end, it doesn't matter whether the crime was planned ahead of time or carried out last minute. Schmidt says the ultimate charge of murder still holds.
They're going to look at that, comes right back into motive. They're going to look at both concepts, so to speak, but ultimately it doesn't matter. I mean, murder is a general intent crime. I mean, versus specific intent is a fraud crime where you have to think about it and kind of go through some steps to do fraud. Murder is like bank robbery. It's general intent. He went ahead and did it. They're just going to look at the facts of the matter and what happened and whether he did it or he did not do it. I mean, that's ultimately what the defense comes down to. And then the defense is going to ask, what was he of the state of mind where he could be held accountable for this? And like I said, it's going to be very unlikely that they're going to give him a so-called pass by reason of insanity in a case where children were the victims.
Jeremy Best made his first court appearance on Monday in Bonneville County, Idaho. He appeared virtually and wasn't wearing a shirt. He's being held without bond and will be due back in court on December 18th. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.